Well, we've got a very serious system issue. We are basically organized around, managed by a system built on the sacred money and market story. And it involves an extreme concentration of the control of the institutions by which we create and allocate money. And we're talking here about, everything from the central banks to the global financial markets and to the global banks and corporations and hedge funds and private equity funds and so forth that are playing games with the financial system. And what we need to recognize here is that in our current society, money is essentially the primary source of power, and it's just accounting entries. But we've gotten ourselves into a situation where, if you go back to earlier days, most people lived by subsistence. They had their piece of land, they had their bit of water where they fish, but people got their livelihoods directly from the lands and waters of Earth. Now, as we have become more developed, more and more people have become alienated from those basic means of production and become dependent for their access to the food, to the shelter, all of the things that are basic to living, even water that we now buy in bottles, on money. If you're dependent on money, you are dependent on the people who control the creation and allocation of money. So that gets into the whole system of how we organize our corporate system, the global trade agreements, the global financial markets, and all of that, all of which are attuned to the idea that if the economy is making money, the economy is growing and making money for rich people, we're all supposed to be better off. Again, that's nonsense, but it's the way we organize. Now, if we're going to get to a viable future, we have to organize around life. That has a huge number of implications. First of all, it means using a very different set of indicators for assessing the performance of the economy. Recognizing that the fundamental purpose of our economy is not to make money for rich people. Duh. It is to support us in creating our means of living in a balanced relationship with Earth. So, if that's our goal, we must be evaluating the performance of our economy against how is it doing in supporting life. Are people healthy? Are children healthy? People getting enough to eat? Do we have secure employment? Do we have a secure place to live? Are we stabilizing the environmental systems on which our continued survival depends and well-being depend? We would, if we were really concerned about the real performance of the economy, we would not be evaluating the economy based on financial indicators like GDP, or even worse, how are the stock market indices doing, which are essentially index of how fast are the rich people getting richer relative to the rest of us. But we would be focused on these indicators. We would be fundamentally rethinking our money system. Money is a very useful institution for a medium of exchange, but it needs to be controlled by people, by communities. Now, you think about the contrast between a Wall Street controlled financial system where essentially, if you understand the system, it is sucking money out of the community into a Wall Street system that is simply using it to play financial games. And it's a very complex thing getting into all the ways these games work so that Wall Street interests can make more and more money for themselves without producing anything of real value. But the way a money system should work is the way it actually did work for a short period after World War II in the United States, where our financial institutions were mainly local. We had local banks, cooperative banks, we had savings and loans, we had credit unions. These were institutions that were owned, they were rooted in the community. We put our savings in, they loaned them back out for people to have their local businesses, to become homeowners and so forth. And that works great. That's supporting people in their balanced relationship with their local ecological systems, environmental systems. You concentrate that control, you shift it up to Wall Street, and it disempowers the people in the community, and it also shifts the whole focus from productive investment to speculative investment, and from serving real needs of real people to simply making more money for rich people. Then you get into the issues of ownership. Now, increasingly, ownership is being consolidated under the control of giant global corporations that, again, are simply in the business of making money. One of the things we're realizing is that without, in a sense, economic democracy, there is no political democracy. It's so interesting. If you go back to Adam Smith, who is celebrated as the father of capitalism, which is nonsense. He was an advocate of market economies, but his ideal was the ideal market would be like our farmers market, where individual people go to the market and they meet with the farmers and they engage in a little trade. If you read Adam Smith, his ideal firm was a single firm of one person who was the owner, the worker, and the manager. So those roles are combined. No corporate monopolies. But it's interesting if you look at that. Adam Smith and Karl Marx both agreed essentially that workers should own their means of production. Now this gets you down into a radically democratic framework of ownership. I often say I believe in private ownership. I think it's such a good thing. Everybody should have some. And basically, we should all own the tools of our trade, the land on which we live and from which we grow our food. That's it's not quite the way we organize in a modern society. But if you begin to take that as your kind of frame, you begin to realize that the various forms of cooperative ownership are extremely important, and of course that is one of the things that people are awakening to, the importance of cooperative forms of enterprise, cooperative banks, cooperative manufacturing, and so forth. And for many of us, kind of an ideal is the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, which demonstrate that it's possible to organize quite sophisticated and large-scale productive activities as worker cooperatives. Then we get into the, this is the daunting part, that there's so many aspects of the way we organize that need to change. We get into law. If you really pay attention to what's happening in the law, and a series of Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court decisions that actually go way back, but the current Supreme Court is just totally out of control on their favoring of corporations and corporate rights. If you look, in fact, in application of the law, we've gotten to a point where corporations, which are legal fictions, have actually more rights protected by law than I do as a living person. Nature has no rights whatever. Now, you think about this. If there are no people, well, I mean, if there's no nature, without nature, there are no people. Without people, there are no corporations. Well, that kind of suggests that you start in exactly the opposite direction. Nature, the source of our life, really has to come first. protecting, it's not protecting each individual ant, but it is protecting the living systems that are essential to the integrity of the whole. Those must be inviolate. Then come people. Maintain nature. What are the rights we need to maintain to secure our well-being and our freedom? The liberty comes only with responsibility. But then you get to corporations. Well, corporations are created by the issuance of a public charter, in theory, to serve a public purpose. There's actually no reason whatever for a corporation to exist except to serve a public purpose. So, should corporations have rights that are in any way separate from the rights of persons? Not evident they should. That comes last. And we should be continuously testing any given corporation as to whether, in fact, it is indeed serving a public purpose. But the idea that we can organize the whole of society around corporations that have the right to do whatever, exploit life in whatever way, in fact maximizes their own profits. Again, we're getting back into the land of absurdity. Then we get into the whole system of education. We get into to the fact that we are teaching an economics which is based on, grounded in, the sacred money and markets story. It presents itself as a science. It is in fact an ideology. And if you begin to deconstruct it, the roots of its theorems and assumptions and so forth, it is intellectual nonsense. It makes absolutely no sense. It is not grounded in reality, and it is not tested against reality. It is a bogus science. But knowledge more generally, we've broken it down into little siloed segments. So we look at the pieces, we develop great expertise in the pieces. What we're dealing with now are living systems. Our future depends on our understanding of the interrelationship between the pieces, which is largely ignored in the way that we organize knowledge and organize education. So that also has to be fundamentally rethought. The whole system by which we organize as a global society needs to be rethought, or as a global economy. Because again, going back to these trade agreements, we've essentially moved in the direction of eliminating the boundaries that define communities, real living communities, that define nations, which are also living communities, in favor of strengthening the boundaries that define corporations, which are basically pools of money. We've got it exactly backwards. Life can only survive and organize within borders, because life has to organize within geographically defined borders to manage the exchanges of water, nutrients, energy, information in ways that maintain the conditions essential to life. We need to organize our economies in the same kind of frame. That means the primary organization needs to be around the boundaries of living communities. That means that we need to move beyond the imperial forms of organization around which we now organize, where, well, if we, back years ago I was reading a New York Times article. It said, well, we're destroying all our fisheries in the United States, but no problem. There's lots more fish in Chile and Thailand and so forth. We'll just reach out and we'll get those fish. And we can ship them in airplanes. Wow. Well, what about the people that live in those places? They need to eat also. Why, if we have been irresponsible in the management of our fisheries, why should we feel we are entitled to go take the fish that remain from their fisheries, in the process destroy their fisheries as well. Well, by the logic of the global economy, this all makes perfect sense. By the logic of a living Earth, it makes no sense whatever. And we need to begin living by the logic of a living Earth. If we each, in our own community, learn to organize in a way in which we live in balance with our local soils, our local water supplies, our local climate, if we can live in balance, meet our needs, maintaining those systems on which we recognize that we will depend on, our children will depend on, and if everybody else does that in their own places, then the whole of the species comes into balance with the living systems of Earth. And as a species, as a living planet, a living Earth, we can all go into the future with some sense of continuity and security.